You think I'm about to warn you away from love. You think I'm going to tell you that after 60, the heart should go into storage like winter coats in July, wrapped up, labeled, stacked on a shelf where it won't cause any damage. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is considerably more inconvenient. I'm going to tell you what I actually saw, what I watched happen to real women over 4 decades of paying attention. And I'm going to tell you what nobody at the senior center will say out loud, because everyone is too busy being polite, and politeness, in my experience, has protected exactly nobody. My name is Odalis. I am 87 years old. I have 9 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild who already has opinions about her socks, and a doctor who looks young enough to be carded at a restaurant. I have also outlived 2 of my closest friends, 1 sister, and the notion that women are obligated to make things comfortable for men who haven't earned comfort. I was married for 48 years to a man named Ferran. He was a structural engineer who once spent 3 hours explaining to me the load-bearing principles of an arch, and I listened to every word, because the way he talked about things he loved made everything sound like music. He was not a perfect man. He was, however, a complete one. He cooked on weekends. He attended every school performance. He asked for my opinion, and then waited for the answer without filling the silence with his own. When our youngest went through something we don't need to name here, Ferran was the one who sat outside her bedroom door at midnight. When he died, I didn't know what to do with the second half of every sentence. Everything I thought ended with, and Ferran would say, and then there was nowhere to put it. I'm telling you about Ferran not to make you sentimental, but because he is the measuring stick, and not every man clears it, not even close. I want to tell you about a woman named Thessaly. Thessaly Birch had spent 32 years as a botanical illustrator, painting plants with a precision and tenderness that made scientists and poets equally unable to look away. Her work hung in institutions. Her name appeared in books she was too modest to mention. Her husband Pyotr died when she was 68. Stroke. Sudden. No time to prepare. Just the ordinary Tuesday morning with its ordinary coffee, and then absence so total it rewrites every memory backward. Thessaly grieved by going inward and becoming more herself. She started walking in the mornings through the botanical gardens. She grew succulents on her windowsills because she appreciated anything that had learned to need very little. By her 2nd year alone, Thessaly had written 3 papers, illustrated 2 monographs, and started teaching a workshop for young women interested in scientific illustration. She told me once that she had found something in the solitude she hadn't expected. Not peace exactly, something more active. She called it self-authorship. She said, "Odalis, for the first time in my adult life, I am writing my own story, and nobody is asking me to adjust the ending." Then she met Radovan. Radovan Z was 66, recently retired from a career in finance that had required very little of him emotionally and a great deal of other people practically. He was handsome in the way some men are at 66, a face that has grown into itself, silver at the temples, a manner that read as unhurried and therefore, incorrectly, as calm. He pursued Thessaly with the focused energy of a man who had recently realized his apartment contained no food he had cooked himself and no one who knew what kind of tea he preferred. Thessaly told me she was hesitant. I told her that hesitation was information worth reading carefully. She didn't read it carefully enough. Within 5 months, Radovan had moved into her apartment, the one she had spent 2 years turning into a sanctuary. The apartment with the good northern light she'd arranged her drafting table to catch. The apartment that had evolved, slowly and deliberately, into an extension of her interior life. He didn't ask her to change anything. He didn't have to. His presence was the change. What nobody tells you, what the second chance love stories in Sunday supplements never mention, is that the rearrangement isn't usually dramatic. It's the accumulation of smaller things. His coffee brand replacing hers on the counter. His schedule imposing structure on mornings she had redesigned for silence. His need for conversation, constant, meandering, consuming of her, filling every pocket of the quiet she had come to depend on. Radovan was 66 years old, and he could not operate a washing machine. He presented this not as an embarrassment, but as a minor administrative detail. "I've just never had to deal with it," said without shame, said with a faint trace of expectation, invisible but present, like humidity. He didn't know how to make a doctor's appointment. He didn't know what food he had at home, because there had always been someone, first a mother, then a wife named Gudrun, who had left him 3 years earlier, for reasons he described as irreconcilable differences, and which I privately suspected were considerably more specific and considerably more his fault. Gudrun had managed his life for 29 years, not the visible life, the career, the income, but the structural life, the appointments, the household inventory, the emotional climate of every room. The invisible work that keeps a human being functional, the work that has no job title and no salary, and is noticed only when it stops. When Gudrun left, Radovan hadn't missed her exactly. He'd missed the running of things. He'd called it loneliness because loneliness was the more sympathetic word. Thessaly became the new infrastructure. Radovan was not a villain. He was not cruel. He brought her flowers. He told her she was extraordinary. He said things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you," with complete sincerity and no apparent awareness that the sentence was a transfer of responsibility dressed up as affection. He loved her the way a person loves a home, warmly, comfortably, and without any particular interest in how it stays standing. Within a year, Thessaly had stopped teaching her workshop. She was up early to make breakfast, and by the time the dishes were done, the light she'd counted on for her most focused work had shifted. Her drafting table had been moved slightly to accommodate a second chair he'd had delivered without consulting her. The move was 6 inches. It cost her the northern light. I noticed before she said anything. She was quieter. She deferred to his opinions in a way she never had before, pausing, glancing toward Radovan, then softening whatever she was about to say into something more palatable. She was editing herself in real time. She didn't even know she was doing it. "I am 87 years old, and I have watched this particular disappearing act so many times that I can spot it from across a room. A woman making herself smaller. Not smaller in body, smaller in presence, pulling in her edges, lowering her voice, taking up less space so that someone else's need for space feels less like a conquest and more like a coincidence. Why is it that women, after 60, after loss, after grief, after the specific devastation of rebuilding a life from scratch, tend to become more solid, more themselves, more capable? And men, so many men, after the same losses, become less functional than a 19-year-old leaving home for the first time. I think it is because women have been rehearsing self-sufficiency their entire lives, even inside marriages that looked like partnerships. Every time we found a way to do two things simultaneously, because nobody else was going to. Every time we held the emotional continuity of a family in our heads like a map. We were building a capacity, slowly, invisibly, without anyone naming it as strength. And men, many men, were being carried. Not out of malice, out of a system that made it easy. A system that said, she'll handle it. She always handles it. And so they never had to. When that system ends, women are surprised by their own resilience. Men are surprised that the system has ended. I had a neighbor, Halvard, who found a woman named Coralie within 8 months of his wife's death. Coralie was 64, warm, capable, recently retired from nursing, a profession that already requires a person to subordinate their own needs to someone else's, consistently and without complaint. She was the ideal match for a man who needed an unpaid full-time caregiver and was offering in return the privilege of his company. Coralie was not less. She was, by any measure, more. More capable, more self-aware, more emotionally fluent, more interesting at a dinner table. But she'd grown up being told that this was how it worked, and she believed it the way we believe things we learned before we knew we were learning them. Fessily stopped finishing things. That's the detail that haunts me. She had a major commission, a series of illustrations for a conservation atlas to be distributed internationally, and she didn't complete it on time. Not because she wasn't capable, because she was tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, the tired that comes from pouring yourself into the shape of someone else's life until your own container is empty. She called me one evening and said, "Oh, Dallas, I think I mistook being needed for being loved." She left Radovan 8 months after that. It took 8 months, not because she was uncertain, but because leaving a person who means well and isn't technically doing anything wrong is harder than leaving a person who is. There's no justifiable exit. There's only the truth. This is costing me my life, and I am not interested in paying any more. She called me the week after he'd moved out. Her voice sounded different. Not happier exactly. Larger. She said she'd moved the drafting table back. The light wasn't perfect. The angle was slightly wrong for the season. But she was working again. She finished the atlas. It's extraordinary. I have a copy. I want to address the men now, because if any of this has a chance of mattering, it has to reach them. I'm not asking for perfection. What I'm asking is accountability. the ongoing, unglamorous daily accountability of a person who has chosen to be a partner and acts accordingly. Learn to exist fully, independently, without requiring another person's unpaid labor to make your daily life operational. If you cannot cook a meal for yourself at 65, that is not charming. It is a debt that somebody has been paying on your behalf your entire adult life, and the fact that you didn't know about the debt does not make it smaller. Go to therapy before the loneliness forces you toward the nearest available woman. Sit in a quiet room and ask what you actually feel, and then stay with the answer. Don't reach for your phone. Don't call someone to dilute the discomfort with conversation. Sit in it. Let it tell you what it knows. There is a version of love after 60 that is genuinely worth having. I've seen it. Two people who have done the work of becoming themselves, who arrive at each other not out of need, but out of genuine, considered, wide-awake choice. Who take care of themselves well enough that caring for each other is addition rather than substitution. That love requires something specific. A man who has sat alone long enough to meet himself and found the meeting instructive rather than unbearable. My son Mikkel is 61. His marriage ended 4 years ago. His former wife, Beatrice, is doing beautifully. She took up ceramics. She travels. She sounds like a woman who found the window after years of looking at the wall. Mikkel called me 6 months after she left. He said he'd learned to make 3 meals, only 3, but reliably. He'd started therapy, said the word carefully, like he was testing whether I'd react. He said, "Mama, I think I've spent most of my life not really knowing what I wanted because there was always someone organizing the options for me." I said, "Yes, Mikkel, now you know." He asked if he'd ever be ready to date again. I said, "When being alone doesn't feel like a problem to be solved, you'll be ready, not a moment before." He was quiet for a while. I didn't fill the silence. I'm sitting now in the chair I've sat in for 30 years. The fabric on the left armrest is wearing thin, where Ferran used to rest his thumb while he was thinking. I notice it every day. Some days it's just a chair. Some days the thin spot is the whole weight of a life, and I hold it all at once and breathe. I do not want to start a new life with someone. I have a life. It is specific and hard-won and entirely mine. My tea is too strong for most people. I wake at 5 and am most useful to myself in the dark morning hours before the world starts asking things of me. I have earned every one of these particulars. The women who thrive after 60 are the ones who stopped measuring their worth by whether someone was measuring it, who looked at their own assembled life and recognized it as sufficient, who learned that alone and lonely are not synonyms, that the first is, sometimes, the most honest home you've ever lived in. And the men who thrive are the ones who did the work of becoming whole before they went looking, who arrived at a relationship bringing something real, not a list of things that used to be provided, but thought and feeling and competence, and the willingness to be a person rather than a position. Thessaly is 79 now. She still illustrates. She still walks in the botanical gardens. She told me recently that she's finally figured out what self-authorship means in practice. She said, "It means being the one who decides what the story is worth." I've been thinking about that for weeks. It seems to me the most useful piece of wisdom I've encountered in quite some time. Be the one who decides what the story is worth. And if someone wants to be part of it, make sure they've done enough of their own work to deserve a chapter. That's all. That's all I have for this afternoon. It is, I think, enough.